Nothing over there. Okay, good. I can put the bottle down here, just in case I need to use that there. Yeah. Yeah, but yeah, okay. You can get a photo. Good afternoon or good morning, everyone, and welcome to this strategic webinar on the EUROCONTROL Stakeholder Forum series. My name is Philip Hughes, Head of Planning and Stakeholder Support at EUROCONTROL. I will be moderating today's session where we will explore how the ATM service can transition to a new service delivery model based on service-oriented architecture. SOA has been identified as one of the crucial enablers for achieving the necessary capacity, efficiency, and resilience for the European ATM system. It's also a cornerstone of the European ATM Master Plan, playing a pivotal role in driving transformative changes. It's one of the three key operational enablers identified by the Network Management Board to enhance capacity and efficiency, together with air-ground integration and seamless airspace design. So by ensuring interoperable, reusable, and user-driven information services, SOA aims to support the creation of a more competitive aviation data market, offering flexibility and provider choice without disrupting existing systems. The A6 group of ANSPs, DSNA, DFS, ENAV, ENAIR, NATS, PANZA, SkyGuide, and Coupans, together with the manufacturing industry companies Thales, Indra, and Leonardo, as well as a growing list of industry leaders, and indeed more recently Eurocontrol, have all signed a joint statement committing to the transition to a new service delivery model for ATM in Europe, as defined in the CESAR European ATM Master Plan, and have drawn up a plan about how to start implementing that. So the joint statement sets out the urgent need to replace the current vertically integrated service model with a cloud-based, data-driven SOA approach. So the new architecture promises quicker deployment and an arrangement of new features, including interoperability and seamless integration across airspace and the technology systems for all ANSPs. So today we're going to explore the various aspects of transitioning to this new service delivery model. We'll explain what it's all about, how it can benefit the aviation sector, how to be implemented, what are the regulations to support it, and we'll discuss the lessons learned from other industries. To help us explore these questions, I'm delighted to introduce our distinguished panelists. We have Mr. Alan C. Baer, who's the Chief of Technology and Strategy at the CESAR Joint Undertaking. We have Heiko Tieper, Head of Strategy and Technical Execution at the CESAR Deployment Manager. We have Klaus Meyer, Chief Technology Officer with SkyGuide. And for an outside view, we have Ralph Herman, who is a Senior Director at Gartner, who provides consultancy services to a range of industries on SOA, and has also participated more particularly quite recently in the CESAR ATM Master Plan. So before we begin, I'd like to remind the audience that you can submit your questions via the Q&A function in Zoom throughout the session. If you experience any technical difficulties, please use the chat function for assistance. Okay, so without further ado, I'd ask Alan to perhaps give us his an initial perspective, particularly on the EU vision and the master plan. Alan.
Thank you, Philip. Hello, everyone. As you know, we all spent some time with all stakeholders to agree what our vision for the future should look like. And we have concluded that we need a system that is more scalable, able to scale up or down in line with the demand for traffic, that should be much more precise in its ability and systematic in its ability to optimize every trajectory in very precise ways, and should be much more resilient and robust from an operational and cyber security perspective. In doing that, it became very clear to everyone that there is an essential component to making this happen in a time horizon that we have set for ourselves that is very ambitious, 2045 for the full vision of ATM modernization in Europe to be complete. And that is this new service delivery model that we need to implement as rapidly as possible. And actually, we concluded that it should be implemented within the next 10 years. Why is it so important? We really want to free ourselves from our ability to implement changes by upgrading the system only through major ATC system upgrades every 15 to 20 years. So the notion of speed has now its value by itself. We also want to be able to leverage best practices that have been applied in other safety and security critical sectors to become more robust and more solid. And we want to be able to free up resources that today are locked into maintaining legacy systems. And we are talking financial resources, but also talents throughout the ATM value chain. So it's not just central to the vision that has been set for Europe for the future, but it is now also recognized as an EU deployment priority for the next 10 years. So happy to speak more about it.
Okay, thanks, Ilan. Heiko, maybe you could give us the deployment manager view in terms of SOA.
Yes, thank you, Philip. Good afternoon to everyone. And I would really like to start connecting to what Alain just said. One of the challenges and the key lessons learned that we see when we deployed the CP1, the Common Project 1, especially in the areas of AF5, that means SWIM, and AF6, the initial directory information sharing, we see that stakeholders, and in this case ANSPs, are really struggling to implement the required functionalities in time. And that's because Alan also stated that in most of the cases, new big ATM systems needs to be implemented. And the problem that we can see can be really summarized in 2 sentences. Either the systems that are currently in use are quite old, so they are reaching the end of their, let's say, life cycle, and it's not technically feasible in investing to upgrade the systems, or systems were just implemented, but they are facing the normal initial operational teething challenges that need to be overcome, which is more important to implement new functionalities. So that's something that we hope that can be really changed with this modular design for independent services. So we can be faster, we can really implement the functionality when it's needed on time, and we are really able to get away from this big monolithic ATM systems. We can reduce cost for maintenance, for the software upgrades, and of course, the main advantage, I think, from my point of view, would be we are really faster and we can implement new functionalities in time. And another, I think, very important aspect that we should not ignore when we talk about deployment is the training. So for the time being, new software updates or new system introductions require a long training period for controllers, for the flight data operators, and also for the ANSPs. That means the people are not really working in the ops room, and they are sitting in the training environment. And the more incremental software developments we can do, the less training is needed, and the more really the ANSPs and the ATCOs and the flight data operators are working in the ops room and are doing what they need to do. They need to ensure and maintain capacity. And from my point of view, also during the deployment, it's necessary that there's a very strong coordination and collaboration, and that there's a platform that is provided to all stakeholders who need to implement. We also need a very strong buy-in, also supported by a strategic common plan. So those would be my, let's say, key aspects on the lessons learned shared for deployment.
Okay, thanks, Heiko. So, Klaus, you've been at the sharp end and at SkyGuide. What's your initial perspective on this?
Well, my perspective is a very positive one because we have been pushing in this direction for quite some time. Around 2015, we started to basically move towards a service-oriented architecture. And basically we said we need to move away from a vertically integrated monolithic system into a horizontal layered open architecture. And the first thing we did in Switzerland was that we started to connect our 2 area control centers with 2 logically independent IP networks. So it's not a point-to-point connection anymore, but it's really an IP network. Plus all the sensors and also the radios are connected via IP and not point-to-point anymore. So that's the first step that we had to take, providing the necessary connectivity between the area control centers. The next step that we then took was to virtualize the computing platform, the CPU and the storage. In a vertical setup, in a monolithic setup, there is a full stack where the application is running on one specific bare metal machine. In a distributed environment, in a network environment, it's running on server farms, on clusters of servers. So you can distribute it and build more resilience in it. We didn't call it cloud yet, because we don't use a full cloud service, but it's a step towards the cloud. And we went live with this kind of setup in 2017. And then we started step by step moving software, legacy software, from the old bare metal environment onto this virtualized service-oriented architecture. And we decided to first move software, most of the software, over in one step, and then start to refactorize it and make it really service-oriented, basically breaking it up in individual services that can be orchestrated and work together. That phase we have only started now. That's the final phase for us. And then we would be basically in a situation where we would have a full service-oriented architecture with a complete new way of delivering service to an ANSP. Now, maybe one thing I have to emphasize here is that Skyguide is an ANSP and a ground equipment service supplier at the same time. So I did have the freedom that I could do it on my own. I didn't need to work with suppliers, and convince them. I could just do it on my own. It has a lot of advantages, but it also has a lot of challenges. And probably we can talk also then a little bit later on the challenges, which I would summarize on three layers. The first one is that legacy software behaves different on a modern platform. Sure, it was written 30, 40 years ago with a certain architecture in mind. So just to migrate doesn't come with risk and challenges. And we did experience that recently, that just, the performance of a virtualized environment is much higher. So the speed of reactions of all the interfaces have changed, and we needed to respond to that. So refactorizing old legacy software, make them generic service-oriented is an absolute important element. The second challenge that we have been facing is related to kind of a generational shift in skill and know-how that is required to move towards the new technologies. So we have still a legacy environment, plus also the new environment, and we need to operate that because we cannot just switch off our core systems and modernize. So these things are, sometimes generational conflicts between the old way of doing it and the new way of doing it. And to underline that, I can always bring the cybersecurity issue as a perfect example, because we used to have firewalls to protect ourselves, but in a modern environment we can't have just firewalls anymore. We need to have security that is going through the whole stack and being able to be implemented. And the approach of security is no change is less secure, whereas in aviation we have change is less secure. So now we need to bring those two worlds together, and that is a challenge in itself. And the third one that we have been facing is regulation. Now, regulation is doing what they can do, and regulation is not there to innovate. But we, as an early mover, we had a lot of efforts to make sure that what we were doing is compliant with the current regulation. And what we found out that current regulation is still built around a vertically integrated stack and closed systems, not connected open systems. And what we need now is also from the regulation side, in particular the technical regulation, to embrace new technologies and find out how we can make new technologies safe for aviation. And this is still a challenging job, and we want to focus on it. I'm happy to go a little bit more detail later on these topics.
Okay, sounds like a fascinating journey, Klaus. So coming to Ralph, then you've got the inside-outside view. You've worked in banking and insurance, but you've also participated in the CESAR Master Plan. So you have a unique insight into how things are, where we are, and how it can evolve. What's your take on this?
So let me start from one thing that Ricardo calls this a composable architecture, to overall, or also a composable architecture, to stress the factor that this is not only about technology, this is also about business, business services, applications, and also covering the infrastructure. So we see this as a composability as a general market trend. And it's a trend, to meet the increasing need to adapt very quickly to new requirements. This is exactly, why you are doing that. If we look into the broader industry, we can see a couple of safety and security critical sectors, which are already on this journey for quite some time, so they are ahead. For example, telco, for example, financial service sector, the IT service sector on its own. What you can learn from them is you should put the client first. That's the paradigm, it's about user experience. User experience should be the top priority. So the focus should be really put on building up, providing flexible, easy to use solutions which can be quickly adapted. And this should be designed in a way that it improves user experience. Now, that's the paradigm, a new paradigm which is not only valid for this SOA architecture, for this composable architecture. Looking into composable architecture or SOA architecture, one thing is very important at the beginning, to have a very clear strategic vision and business alignment. So looking at the master plan, you have designed this is the right approach, because it gives a clear understanding why you are doing it and why you have to do it and what is the strategic goals. The second point, and you already mentioned it, the declaration which was signed last year, this is about governance. It's very important if you start such a really, really huge and broad transformation to have the right support. Strong leadership and governance is really important to ensure alignment, but also, accountability during this implementation process. These are two topics, but there are more. For example, standardization, interoperability. A very, very critical and crucial topic is, if you look at the composable architecture, these components need to be able to work together. So therefore, it's very important to establish strict standards and data formats, API standards, communication protocols, etc., to make sure that all these components work together. So CESAR is already facilitating dialogue between the industry to agree such necessary standards. And the other point, is about modularization of systems. All the industries, I have seen, were built upon legacy applications, monolithic applications. And key to such a SOA architecture is to break these monolithic systems into smaller, independent components, modules as a core principle. And these modules are easier to update, to scale, also to replace as needed. And they can replace independently, which is a challenge for sure for the certification and regulation. But on the other side, it's much easier to update such a component than the whole entire system. And this is exactly for the time being going on. CESAR is facilitating also there the dialogue with the industry to deliver, EU reference breakdown of services, level 2 services, in line with the European ATM Master Plan. Last not least, what you can learn and what is also initiated is it fosters collaboration between the various stakeholders. So it's about vendors, software providers, infrastructure, the whole ecosystem can work together in such an approach to co-develop composable architecture for shared benefits and to co-innovate. I'm happy to discuss also the challenges on the other side, maybe later. Back to you, Philip.
Okay, thanks, Ralph. Well, I can see there's a lot of stuff which we can cover here. maybe we'll start at the top and then I'll go back to Alan. So Ralph has mentioned the fact you need a strategic plan, you need be client-centric, we need a proper governance structure. How is Cesar supporting the implementation of this new service delivery model in practice, given the conservative nature of the industry which we work in?
Yes, a very good point. I mean, our role is clearly to facilitate this transition. So in very practical ways, we are facilitating a dialogue between the main air navigation service providers represented by the A6 primarily, and the main technology providers represented by Thales, Indra, and Leonardo, to make sure that this is not just a vision, that we have a very precise idea and shared idea of what success would look like. We are associating gradually more partners, and you have heard that the call for action that we have published is raising interest. So we are very happy to have also Frequentis who joined, EUROCONTROL that joined, Euronavigatia, LVNL, but also the professional staff associations for the human dimensions with IFATCA that joined. And we will continue to encourage more of those willing forces to come together so that we can really agree precisely in an implementable manner how success would look like. We also intend to be very open and transparent about this. So we are most likely going to organize together with EUROCONTROL, the SDM workshop later in May, possibly, where we will start to, for the whole community, see how we see this future in an implementable manner. Because the next step for us is to really develop a concrete implementation roadmap that will have to be the reality test of our dreams with, reality. The reality today is that the new service delivery model is not yet implemented. Everyone has plans to upgrade their systems for the years to come. Everyone has a very different starting point. And we would like to know what is realistic if we have an emphasis on speed in implementing that, and bring it together with also the EASA technical regulatory framework that is evolving to create the conditions for this to be successfully implemented, not in 20 years, not in 30 years, not in 50 years, but in 10 years in operation.
That sounds like it's an interesting initiative, and I think the workshop is a really good idea. But in terms of the actual risks associated with it, there's a number of questions online, and I'm looking at Klaus, for instance, in terms of, there were questions, for instance, here I've just seen from Gerhard Wagner about how will the users get access to such services? Where are the systems sited? What are the, you spoke a little bit about the gradual way in which SkyGuide were doing this. Could you talk a little bit about the risk management piece and maybe touch on the human factor as well?
Yeah, it's an excellent question. It's the risk was at the core of our program. There was a lot of discussions in the beginning. Shall we approach it in a parallel process? We have the old world, we let the old world run, and then we develop a new world, and at one day we're going to switch over. So kind of a big bang approach, similar to what sometimes other industries are doing with their SAPs or their ERPs. And we refrained from this approach because we said we are in the safety business, so safety is at the core. And to do a big bang with a fundamental change of an architecture is simply not feasible. So we need to do that in steps. And the famous question of how do you eat an elephant? You cut it into smaller pieces. And I tell you, I had a lot of jokes about that elephant in the last 8 years. But I strongly believe that we need to do that in steps. We need to do that like you do digitalization, because we talk about the digitalization of the European sky. You first need to provide the connectivity, then you need to provide the way of how you can bring data together, then you aggregate data, and then you create new business processes based on that availability of more data. And that has to be done in steps, and this is what we have done at SkyGuide. If you ask me then about the risks, I saw the biggest risk and still see the biggest risk not in moving the platforms. We could prove that this is working, it's performant enough, and so forth. Connectivity is there, IP networks are working. These modern technologies have been proven in other industries that they are performant and have the quality that is sufficient also for aviation usage. The real risk is once you take the legacy software and you start to move that legacy software onto the new platform, or when you start to try to take this monolithic software apart. How do you take that apart? And I still see that as, for us, the biggest challenge. And if we are in exchange with the big suppliers, they also come up with these questions. And this splitting up in layer 1 services, layer 2 services is very essential in this kind of question of how can we do that in a safe way in order to make sure that the performance of the systems are not suffering and they are performing. When it comes to the human factor side, then there are two elements. One is the controllers, at the end, the final user of that solution. Well, here we for us was always important at SkyGuide to work closely with the users, with the controllers. And I think if someone asks why SkyGuide is doing and what assets SkyGuide is having, then we are not probably the best software developers. But we can really work closely with our users, which are the ATCOs. So have their buy-in and support in every step that we are doing is absolutely essential. The risk again comes on the engineering side, because it is a generational shift. The architecture that we are using today in our normal monolithic ATM systems is based on COBA, and that is an architecture that I have been learning when I was at university, and that is quite some time ago. And now you come with new technologies, so you bring different generations together and different ways of thinking, and that is another risk of having enough know-how, I call it computer science know-how, in an ANSP or in a ground equipment supplier, while at the same time not neglecting 120 years of aviation safety. So to bring those two worlds together, that has been a challenge for us, and I still see as a challenge as we move forward, because the world are philosophically different. As I said before, in aviation, a change is, first of all, not safe. So you show that every change that you do will be safe afterwards again. Whereas in IT, not to change makes you less secure. So you need to constantly change. And it happened very early when we introduced the new platform. We said we need to patch our operating systems. And I was required to do a safety assessment. What's the impact of the change of the operating system on a mid-air collision? And that is a fundamental conflict that we need to address and need to tackle.
I can certainly identify with the engineering technical piece as somebody who remembers putting in cards into an IBM 34 system to run a program in Fortran. We've come a long way since then. And I think your point about the client focus and making sure you have buy-in at an ACO level, I think is extremely important. But if I turn to what I term the European dimension, the connection piece, and I'm looking at Heiko, we've seen the whole saga around the implementation of CP1. We all understand the complexity of trying to initiate changes at a European level. What's your view of the risks that we potentially face in terms of trying to implement SOA?
Well, thank you for the question, Philip. I think there were many aspects already mentioned. And one of the key aspects I think that we really need to address is that we have to have a regulation which is supporting that. So we need to have a regulation that really allows us to be fast and to really increment or implement software and incremental changes. And that means, from my point of view, all the supporting processes that are needed to do that should not take longer than the software development and the testing and maybe the training itself. I think that's one of the key issues that we need to solve to be sure that we can really make use of the advantage of being fast and flexible.
But isn't there a slight paradox there, given the speed at which we implement regulation in Europe vis-a-vis? Because what Klaus is talking about is we have to do this quicker. We can't wait from a security point of view. Yet if we look at the regulatory environment, there's a safety dimension, there's an economic dimension. How do you think we can, and I go back to the Draghi report recently where they spoke about how Europe needs to actually streamline the whole regulatory process. How do we actually get to that piece, that acceleration piece?
I think EASA already did quite an important step. I think there's a task force that's just established where all the implementing stakeholders and all the organizations involved come together and think about that and try to identify a process how this can be achieved. So I guess the first step to really involve all the affected people, all the interested parties right from the beginning, I think is already quite a good and promising sign.
Okay. And Klaus, you've been at the sharp end in terms of the regulatory and both safety and economic. Do you think that the right structures and incentives indeed are in place in order to try and do that?
Well, there are two regulations for me. One is the technical regulation, the other one is the economic regulation. When it comes to the technical regulations, I do see a readiness of, in this case, EASA, to really face these challenges. How can we bring modern technologies like service-oriented architectures into the aviation industry? And the challenge I still see also, again, the conflict between aviation and computer science. In aviation, you still talk, most of the time you talk about a closed system, which is an aircraft, for example. Whereas in ground equipment, and in particular in the new service delivery model, we want to connect area control centers because we want to stop micromanage a sector. We want to manage basically a flow in a network. And for that, you need to connect. This is digitalization. And so there, the regulator is now, we have started these exchanges to present our cases, our design, and now we're looking into how can we make that design safe. So it's like in the aircraft industry, you come up with a new design for an aircraft and you want to get basically your airworthiness certificate. And from there, you go to the next step and say, I want to produce that aircraft, in this case, this software. So I want to have a conformity certification. And I think that process we need to now really take with a clear focus on applying new technologies with new architecture. And I think I see here good signs that we are moving in the right direction. The question is now, how quickly can we do that? And obviously we have to do that together with the ground equipment industry. Okay. I have a little bit more concerns at the moment on the economic regulation because the connection between the European ATM Master Plan and the way of how we do the performance review and the national performance plans, it's a very weak link. Let's put it that way, if you're really very polite. But we do not incentivize basically really moving to a different approach. We still, look at investing in big monolithic systems. If you say I need to introduce one of the big suppliers' solutions costs me hundreds of millions, that is incentivized. And we would say, no, you should incentivize if someone does not implement a monolithic system anymore, but wants to move towards a service, to say, I want to buy a service, even maybe from another ANSP or across the border. And here the issue now is twofold. One is, if you do that, your OPEX goes up. So you are basically penalized on the performance scheme. So you are still incentivized to spend a lot of CapEx buying big monolithic systems. And the other issue is the question of sovereignty. we still operate very much in nation states and not thinking of how to strengthen the European network. And that's another element or another force working against this kind of developments.
Okay. Ralph, from the outside looking in, you discussed some of the points in terms of the risks. What's Gartner's experience in terms of these kind of transitional issues, both financial and cultural?
So what I completely agree with what Klaus has said. His experience is quite representative. So what we see is that such a transformation, encounters resistance. So you need to have, as Klaus said, that you have to work very closely with the users on the one hand side. On the other side, you really have to have organizational change processes established and also the right trainings in place. The other thing we see as a risk is, you will not switch in a big bang within one day from a monolithic system to a SOA architecture. So there will be phases where this is very heterogeneous. So you need to integrate various services, outside services, new ones with legacy. So it's very important to have a very, very clear integration strategy. The other thing is also, SOA and the way of setting up composability is a mind shift. So you need new skills, you may need new tools, you need new technologies, and you have to get used to it. So you need to train your team, or you need to hire people who have made this experience before. And last not least, looking at this composable architecture, it also comes with complexity, and complexity needs to be governed. So you should not underestimate the need for a very, very clear, effective governance. That if the governance is not set up in the right way, it can lead to inconsistencies around the services. The quality could suffer. So it's really very, very important to have very clearly established governance frameworks to allow the reuse of the services and to get clear guidance how and when the services should be used. So these are all these points fit very well with the experience of Klaus, I would say.
Okay. So Alain, given everyone agrees that the governance piece is really important. We as Europeans are complicated in the way which we set ourselves up. I've two questions for you. First of all, what's your view in terms of the practicality in terms of how this governance piece would work? And secondly, can you talk a little bit about the ATM manufacturers themselves in terms of what's in it for them? If I am already a monopoly and I'm building a vertically integrated system, why would I? Because these are, the manufacturers are all part of the declaration as well. What's in it for them? Is there not a potential conflict of interest?
I will do my very best to answer those delicate questions, Phil. I think on governance, it all for me ties back to some extent also to creating and enabling regulatory framework for all of this. It has been emphasized both from a technical and economic perspective. I mean, right now the master plan is essentially stating that the implementation of the new service delivery model is an EU priority, but there is, strictly speaking, no obligation to do it. So we are more there to create the conditions for those that would like to move fast, to be able to move fast and to face less headwind by having an enabling framework, both technically and economically, working hand in hand with the Commission services and EASA to make this happen as rapidly as possible. Naturally, the question will have to be raised as part of a process that we are going to initiate later this year, which is a definition of the future common project. Do we need to consider additional enforcements of this new service delivery model? Is there a need for strengthened coordination at EU level to make sure that we de-risk the implementation of this central component of the master plan? And I don't want to prejudge the answer to this question, because we will have to have a dialogue around this. But should the answer be yes, I think there will be also questions that will have to be answered with regards to how that strengthened governance to de-risk important implementation aspects of the master plan will have to be addressed. On your point on the ground manufacturing industry, I mean, there are multiple reasons why it makes a lot of sense for them to work in that direction. One is, and I'm not going to make it by order of priority, so you will have to choose what is most important, is they want to satisfy their clients. And the clients have been very clear that this is what they want. They want more open systems. They want also to be able to operate in an environment where we can use services from multiple vendors. So it's a way for them to satisfy clear requests coming from the main ANSPs in Europe for now. Secondly, you know, the Thales, Indra, and Leonardos of this world right now are being solicited very much to build and invest significantly on security projects, etc. This is where the wind is blowing. So they need, with the scarce resources they have, and here we come back to talent and engineering talent, etc., to be able to make sure that they deliver good products also for the civilian market. And they see an opportunity here to somehow scale up an investment that they would do to develop a system by making sure that it can be used not just by one center, but more centers across all Thales users, across all Indra users, across all Leonardo users. So it's a kind of develop once, implement many times perspective, where obviously there is some value at stake. The last bit then is also linked to I think a general understanding that as we are moving into a digital European sky, the future value does not reside anymore only on who is developing a piece of equipment to make this work, but in the ability to deliver services in that environment. And that is just a whole new view of what value looks like, and they want to play a part in this.
Yeah, I think the interesting thing there is the whole move towards providing a service. And I think this is a kind of a big enabler for change. Heiko, I think, you know, from a deployment manager point of view, what's your view in relation to that in terms of potentially what we could do?
Yeah, I think the first and I think decisive step, and that's already worked on, is to come to a common definition what kind of services need to be there for, let's say, an ACC, so that we really have a common definition. I don't know, flight plan correlation service, tactical controller tool service. What do we mean by that? And to really create the awareness and also the buy-in of all, let's say, ANSPs that we have in Europe for this kind of service delivery model. I think that would be the first step, that we have that. And I think this is even complicated enough or challenging enough, let's put it that way. And I personally convinced that this also needs a strong coordination and a strong collaboration and a platform where everybody gets together and can share their views and also find a kind of common way ahead. So that's, for me, one of the key, let's say, next steps. And then also, of course, resulting on that, we need a kind of plan to really have a clear direction where we go and who's moving when. And also this plan, I think, needs to be shared and needs to be really collaboratively elaborated. And there also we need to have the buy-in and the acceptance of all stakeholders involved in that.
Okay. Ralph, can I come back to a point you made? I sit on the EUROCONTRol Council and we look at standards in the ATM industry. One of the key points you made was around the really big need for standards and ensuring interoperability. Can you just talk a little bit about the experiences in other industries about how critical this part is?
It's very, very critical. If I take my experience I made maybe 15 years ago, it was quite interesting because there, there was a regulation enforced, which was called PSD2, Payment Service Directive 2, which forced all banks, thousands of banks in Europe, to open up their systems. So it's similar to maybe to the ATM industry for the time being. You have silos, you have data silos. It was protected, prevented, it was not shared. So they were forced to open it up. And the question was then, what kind of API technology should be used? And we had discussions with banks saying, we develop our proprietary technology, to protect our data, to prevent this, to build up hurdles for companies, new companies to get access to this data. But at the end of the day, this wouldn't have helped. I said to them, if you want to build up a proprietary standard, a provider will come in and connect, the outside world to all the banks, and you would have another, competitor created. So at the end of the day, we have now in Europe very few API standards which allow, new market, new companies, to get access in a very standardized way to all this data. It allows for innovation, it reduces also for new market participants, the ability to enter the market. This is one of the other benefits. So it's really fostering the innovation. This is what we see, that also in this area, standards are really the key fundamental thing. The other observation I made is, the question is, if you talk about standards, is always the question on standard on which level. Are we talking about really API standard? Are we talking about standardized data models? Are we talking about standardized components? This is a thing which still needs to be defined, to my understanding. As I observe it in the banking world, this is about the integration layer. We are talking about standard API, standard integration. We are not talking about, in the banking world, to have standard credit engines or whatever. The engines could be different. Only, the way on how you access it, it's standardized.
Okay. Klaus, 2 points which have kind of come up in discussions. One is around training of staff, and the other is a little bit around cybersecurity. There's two. If I take cybersecurity first, there are two views. Closed systems are easier, therefore it's not as much of an issue. What's your view in terms of that? And secondly, you might also touch on the training issue. Again, a lot of the questions which are coming online are about what training and competence piece, and if you were to have incremental software development, does that give you an opportunity for having people less out of the operations room for training, etc.? So maybe you might touch on those.
So regarding cybersecurity, to say a closed system is securer than an open system, yeah, that is intrinsically correct. But my question then would be: do we ignore the business requirement? Because someone shall tell me how we can really deal with a 6% growth in the airline industry and the capacity requirements and the flexibility also with military airspace and so forth, with the current setup where we have 68 isolated area control centers micromanaging a sector. So yes, we can stay the way of how we've been the last 60 years or 80 years and saying, oh, we are secure. I do believe we need to, again, follow the demand that is coming upon air traffic management in Europe or worldwide. And now we need to apply the technologies that are available to us in a safe and in a secure way. And that requires also a paradigm shift in the way of how we deal with cybersecurity risks. When I joined Skyguide 10 years ago, I was asking them, and when I joined them, I came to the data center and asked, and what operating system is the core system running? And I've expected HP Unix or something like that. And then I was told Windows, and I said, okay, that's courageous. Windows is you can do it. But when I then got the answer which version of Windows was running, I felt that cold air in my back. I said, so how do we patch that? And I said, we don't patch because we have a good firewalls. And I think that with this attitude, we can't survive. I think we are opening other vectors of attack, and that's why I strongly believe we need to also in air traffic management, we need to learn to apply modern technology in a safe way. Now, when it comes to training, I think for me, one of the biggest challenges and one of the biggest gaps I encountered probably about 4 years ago was exactly the fact related to cybersecurity, because we introduced IP networks as our foundation. And we even, started to introduce digital voice systems that run through IP networks and really digitalized now. And that was a challenge to my people, because before I had a radio engineer who was a radio engineer, and I'm an engineer, and I'm myself. You had your analog point-to-point connection, and you looked at the signal and did signal processing, and that suddenly changed from signal processing to managing data packages. And not just data, but time-sensitive transmission of data. And that was a challenge for the radio guys. And for the network guys, the challenge was, suddenly in the speed and the latency plays a different role. So we needed to really teach them how to use these new technologies. And the same then also with cybersecurity. Cybersecurity can only work if it's done on what I call a zero trust approach. You constantly need to monitor your system about normal, or we call it nominal or non-nominal behavior. That's the only way of how you can respond quickly to any kind of threats. And again, this requires a complete different thinking of my engineers. So there's a lot of training involved in bringing basically what I say, computer science know-how into the aviation industry, and you have to take that seriously. It's really important, but at the same time, it's also natural. You come with new technologies, you need to be qualified to use and apply those new technologies.
Okay. So we could go on with this discussion for a long time. I think we've only barely touched on some of the key issues, but so what I'd like each of you to do would be to summarize the kind of key takeaway. What's the key message for the audience you would like to kind of share? Maybe I'll start with you, Alain, to go back to the previous sequence. What's your key message?
Well, I think it's been a great discussion. I would really like to have my concluding remarks for the audience. I've seen close to 200 participants joining. And maybe some of you are skeptical about this. And to you, I would like to say that we are aware that change is never easy. But we also believe that standing still in a world of growing uncertainty, risks, and volatility is no longer the safe option. Equally, for those of you that may be over-enthusiasts, I would like to say that this isn't going to be a sprint. It's going to be a steep 10-year coordinated climb. And then I hope that to most of you that are neither skeptical or over-enthusiastic, so that you see both the promises and the challenges, I would say that this is exactly what we need right now. And with you, let's transform this into action.
Okay. So moving on from that vision statement from Alain, Heiko, I'll ask you to talk a little bit about what your STM perspective is.
Yeah, thank you, Philip. Also, I think it was a very good discussion, and thank you that I could be part of that. I think we saw that really service-oriented architecture helps us to be faster, to really deploy functionalities in a faster way. I think also I'd like to stress that we need a strong collaboration, we need a strong coordination, and also consultation to also try to balance what Alain just stated. We have people who are very enthusiastic and people who are a bit skeptic, but we need to move together in the right direction. So I think that's really the most important thing, that everybody buys into this new service-oriented architecture. And as Alain said, let's make it happen. And really, let's work on it. I think it's very important to make sure that we as Europe can be competitive.
So Klaus, you are the early mover, the man who has the scout or the sharp point of the whole process. What's your kind of key messages to those who are looking to dip their toes in the water?
It's no picnic. So I paid my price too, and it's really a challenge, but it probably also has to do that we were an early mover, and we you couldn't look any other place. If we start to move as an industry, we can help each other, and we can support each other, even if it means more competition for the ground equipment suppliers. But I believe we need to really face this as an industry, the challenge ahead of us, which is the capacity crunch that is coming. And now, I have an airline background, and I experienced, deregulation in the airline industry in the 90s. And at that time, having an own reservation system was strategically important, and we protected it like the Holy Grail. And it took quite some time until we had reached that tipping point when we started to realize that once we start to connect the reservation systems, the whole industry is benefiting from it. And out came the so-called GDSs, and today nobody will question that anymore. And I think we should also just keep that in mind when we talk about service-oriented architecture. What it means is that we start working together so the whole industry is benefiting from that new architecture.
Okay. Now, Ralph, I leave the last word to you.
Okay. Thanks a lot. So I'm very positive about this development. Also, thanks for inviting me. Yeah, so I'm positive because this will foster collaboration across Europe. This will foster, from my perspective, co-innovation and efficiency. There are risks, and we all agree on that. But from my perspective, the ecosystem is taking the right steps, and I'm happy to support this personally. My last three final messages are, first, don't waste time arguing why this won't work, right? So invest this energy to make it happen, number one. Number two, embrace the change. And number three, reap the benefits as early as possible. These are the three messages I want to give to the audience.
Thank you, Ralph. Yeah. And I think for me personally, I think we as an industry are at a tipping point. I think that we don't have the capacity within the system anymore based on the way in which we're doing business at the moment. We need to change the paradigm in terms of what we need to do. We need scalability, resistance, capacity in the system, and we need to do it safely. So I think it's a really interesting cusp in terms of change. But I think going back to the point you were making, it has to be client-centered. We have to have proper governance. I think the master plan is extremely important in terms of identifying what the vision is, and we need a supportive regime, both in terms of economic regulation and safety regulation, that supports us in this process as well in terms of doing that. So I look forward to, in the future, seeing the developments, particularly with the A6 SJU piece, and looking forward to that, the workshop in May. We don't have a date for the workshop in May yet, do we, Alain?
Not yet.
Okay, all right.
Soon.
So for those of you interested, please keep tuned. I think this you will see a lot of this in the future, so let's move ahead with that. So it only remains for me today to thank all our panelists. I hope you found today's webinar insightful. I'd like to give, again, a special thanks for all the valuable contribution. I'd also like to thank the audience for your active participation, and thank you for sending in the questions and being engaged in the discussion. So please stay tuned for our next webinars and look forward to catching up with you all again soon. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot.